Please confirm the session is being recorded
I can, yes.
and that there are no changes to the agenda today.
None today, thank you.
And I assume by silence that there are no conflicts of interest with any panel members. Okay, the third item on the agenda today is the review of 121 and 135 Mary Street. Lead planner on the file is Daniel Barnett. Good afternoon, Daniel. We are ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation under 10 minutes.
Hey, good afternoon. Just give me 1 second and I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, good afternoon, members of the public, design review panel, and staff. This is a proposed development for the properties at 121 and 135 Mary Street, located on the west side of Mary Street between Cannon Street East and Wilson Street. The proposal is for a 10-story, 32.3 meter tall residential development containing 156 dwelling units, as well as a social service establishment on the first floor and parts of the second floor. Total of 35 parking spaces in one level of underground parking are proposed, along with 128 long-term bicycle parking spaces and 10 short-term bicycle parking spaces. The proposed development will have a residential density of approximately 593 units per hectare. So this is the proposed development on the west side of Mary Street. To the north of the property is a 3.5-story multiple dwelling. To the east is an industrial building. To the southeast is Beasley Park. To the south is low-rise residential. And to the west is both low-rise residential as well as a commercial development. So this is a view of the subject property, specifically the existing building at 135 Mary Street, as seen from Mary Street looking west. This is the existing building on the subject property at 121 Mary Street, as seen from Mary Street looking west. This is the existing low-rise residential dwellings located to the south of the subject property, again as seen from Mary Street looking, in this case, southwest. This is a photo of Beasley Park, located to the southeast of the subject lands, as seen from Mary Street looking southeast. This is a photo of the existing industrial building located on the east side of Mary Street, across the street from the subject land, again as seen from Mary Street, in this case looking northeast. This is the 3.5-story multi-dwelling located to the north of the subject property, seen from Mary Street looking west. And this is a view of the existing low-rise residential dwellings located on the west, to the west of the subject lands, as seen from Catherine Street north looking east. And this is a photo of the existing low-rise residential, as well as the 2-story commercial building located to the west of the subject land, seen from Catherine Street looking east. So this is a site plan, or preliminary site plan, proposed site plan that was submitted with the submission for the 10-story development. This is an image of the underground parking garage that is being proposed for this development. This is a image of the ground floor for the proposed development. This is a image of actually the easterly elevation plan. The submission material unfortunately mischaracterized it as the north, but is the east elevation plan. Similarly, what is the west elevation plan which is the rear, is actually being identified as the south. Similarly, the north elevation is being again identified as the east elevation, and the south elevation is been identified incorrectly as being the west elevation in the submission materials. So this is a rendering of the proposed building of the southeast perspective. This is a rendering of the northeast perspective. This is a rendering of the northwest perspective, so the back of the building. This is kind of an aerial rendering of from the aerial point of view, and this is a 3D massing aerial. So the subject property is identified as being in the Downtown Urban Growth Center on Schedule E of the Hamilton Official Plan. It is designated a downtown mixed use on Schedule E1 of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan. It's downtown mixed use area. In terms of major policy themes, the Downtown Growth Center is the preeminent node in Hamilton due to its scale, density, range of uses, function, and identity, and shall be planned with a range of uses appropriate to its role as the city's predominant node. The Downtown Growth Center shall function as a residential neighborhood with a large and diverse population. A range of housing types, including affordable housing and housing with support, shall be encouraged. And then the Downtown Urban Growth Center shall generally have a higher density with a city with a minimum overall density of 250 persons and jobs per net hectare. In terms of the downtown mixed use area, permits a range of uses, including multiple dwellings and institutional uses. Density height is set out in the secondary plan for lands designated downtown mixed use. Downtown mixed use area shall be designed as a pedestrian-focused area with a high level of pedestrian comfort and amenities. Buildings shall generally be located close to and oriented to the street and shall be create a comfortable pedestrian environment. Building mass shall be consider the pedestrian nature of the area, and massing techniques such as step backs and terrace floors may be required. And then reduced parking shall be considered in recognition of the high level of transit service in the area. In terms of residential intensification for the urban design policies, the relationship to propose to the existing neighborhood character so that it maintains and enhances the desirable and established patterns and built forms. The compatible integration of the development with the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character. Urban design should foster a sense of community pride by identifying by respecting the existing character, development patterns, built form, and landscape, conserving and respecting the existing built heritage features of the city and its communities, and contributing to the character and ambience of the community through appropriate design of streetscape and amenity areas. Quality spaces physically and visually connecting the public and private realms by using materials that are consistent and compatible with the surrounding context in design of new buildings, creating a continuous animated street edge in urban environments, creating public spaces that are human scale, comfortable, and publicly visible with ample building openings and glazing. New development and redevelopment should enhance the character of the existing environment by complementing and animating existing surroundings through building design and placement as well as through the placement of pedestrian amenities, respect the existing cultural and natural heritage features of the existing environment by reusing, adapting, and incorporating existing characteristics, complementing the existing massing pattern, rhyme, character, color, and surrounding context, encourage a harmonious and compatible approach to infill by minimizing the impact of shadowing and maximize light to adjacent properties in the public realm. In terms of built form, new development shall be designed to minimize impacts on neighboring buildings and public spaces by creating transition and scale to neighboring buildings, ensuring adequate privacy and sunlight to neighboring properties, and minimize the impact of shadow and wind conditions. New development shall be massed to respect the existing and planned street proportions. Built form shall create a comfortable pedestrian environment by locating principal facades and primary entrances parallel to and close to the street as possible. Include ample glazing on the ground floor to create visibility to and from the public sidewalk. Include quality landscaping for along frontages. And then locate parking to the side and rear of sites or buildings, and then using design techniques such as building step backs. So the subject property is designated downtown residential in the Downtown Hamilton Secondary Plan. It is identified as being a high-rise 2 area in the Downtown Hamilton Secondary Plan. One of the two properties, 121 Mary Street, is included on the city's register as a non-designated property. And the subject property has been identified as having a maximum building height relative to the escarpment of 109.2 meters above sea level. So as I mentioned, it's downtown residential. Multiple buildings are permitted in downtown residential. In terms of height, for high-rise 2, there's a minimum 2-story required and a maximum of 30 stories. As mentioned, it's one of the properties, 121 Mary Street, is a registered non-designated property. Maximum building height of 192 meters above sea level for the escarpment. The proposed 10-story building constitutes a mid-rise built form in the secondary plan. Mid-rise buildings shall be designed to address the street with active frontages and principal entrances from the public realm. Mid-rise buildings shall create transition between low-rise neighborhoods and existing or future tall buildings through the use of step-backs and setbacks. Mid-rise buildings shall be designed to frame the street where they are fronting while allowing access to sunlight to adjacent properties. Through the consideration of building orientation, setbacks, step-backs, angular planes, and the relationship to grade and land use. Sun shadow studies, visual impacts assessments, and wind studies may be required. Development in the downtown Hamilton secondary plan supports a high standard of urban design through the emphasis on protecting built heritage resources. Built form should integrate the top rooftop design and function with the surrounding buildings and public spaces through integrated roof design. With building architecture, screen rooftop mechanical equipment, develop rooftop terraces, gardens, and associated landscaped areas for private amenity, climate enhancement, and for stormwater management. Incorporate best practices and appropriate technologies to reduce energy consumption and improve air quality. Orient development towards the street and provide direct pedestrian access, including barrier-free access from grade to the principal entrance. Build as close to the street as possible. Develop and shall be masked to frame the street in a way that respects and supports the adjacent street proportions, be compatible in the context of the neighborhood, contribute to high quality spaces within the surrounding public realm, provide high quality spaces within the buildings themselves, provide amenity space within the new development. Development shall incorporate high quality durable materials, should be and then transitioning and scale the development shall be built form transition to scale from through a variety of design methods, including angular plane, location and orientation of building, and use of setbacks and stepbacks. Transition between the development and adjacent streets, parks, open space shall ensure access to sunlight and sky views. Development shall be required to provide transition and scale within the development site as a result of any of the following development is of any greater intensity scale than adjacent existing buildings or appropriate. The plan built form context, the development in adjacent to cultural heritage resources or cultural heritage landscapes, or the development of adjacent or to existing parks and open spaces. In terms of the public realm, development shall, through the building massing and orientation, minimize shadow on the sidewalks, parks, public, private open space. Development shall allow a minimum of 3 hours of sun coverage between 10 and 4 at the equinox on public streets, and as well as public and private outdoor amenity areas. And buildings shall be sited, masked, and designed to reduce and mitigate wind impacts on the public realm. The subject property is zone D5. It's identified as having a maximum building height of 99 meters in the zoning bylaw. The use of multi-dwelling and as well as the social service establishment are permitted for lands zoned downtown residential D5. Maximum front yard setback of 4.5 meters is permitted. Maximum side yard setback of 7.5 meters is permitted. Minimum rear yard setback of 7.5 meters is required. Minimum amenity space of 4 square meters per unit. Parking varies depending on the size of the units. And then also there's parking requirements for social service establishment. However, it's not clear based on the kind of information provided whether the 35 parking spaces will be sufficient to meet the parking needs or whether there will be a deficiency in the required parking. In terms of long-term bicycle parking, they do have an overabundance of bicycle parking, so they're providing more than what the bylaw requires. The same thing with in terms of short-term bicycle parking. In terms of specific areas of discussion, first, does the proposal represent compatible integration with the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character? Does the proposal conserve and respect existing built heritage features of the area? And does the proposal create a comfortable pedestrian environment by locating principal facades and primary building entrances parallel to the street and as close to the street as possible? Include ample glazing on the ground floor to create visibility to and from the public sidewalk. Include a quality landscape edge along the frontage where buildings are set back from the street. And then finally uses design techniques such as setbacks and stepbacks to maximize sunlight to pedestrian areas. And that concludes my presentation. I think you're muted.
Sorry, if the proponent could present and limit their presentation to 10 minutes, that would be great.
Sure. Michael, can you share your screen?
Yes. Just, I can find the right one. This may be it. I might have to ask Kirsten to find it. I can't seem to find my PowerPoint, not the PowerPoint, but the Bluebeam. Thank you, Kirsten.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Badley, Urban Designer and Project Manager with T. Johns Consulting Group. Joining us today are various members of Good Shepherd Nonprofit Homes and the design team. With us, we have Brother Richard McPhee, CEO of Good Shepherd, Chris Lee, designer with Allen and Lee Architects, Michael McKnight, partner at McKnight Sharon Limited Architects, and Kirsten Shepard Newhofer, intern architect with McKnight Sharon Limited Architects. The Good Shepherd is a community leading provider of social, health, and housing services for the homeless and those at risk of homelessness. Good Shepherd has provided emergency housing and daily meal programs for their Mary Street location for 50 years, and the proposed redevelopment reflects an advanced response to these issues. Next slide. Daniel did a great job with his introduction, so I won't spend too much time on the site context, but as you can see, 121 and 135 Mary Street is located in the Beasley neighborhood in downtown Hamilton, which has historically functioned with a mix of residential and non-residential uses. The subject lands are located within a 5 to 10 minute walking distance of Beasley Park, Gore Park, and J.C. Burmer Park, the Hamilton Farmers Market, Hamilton Central Public Library, various commercial and community uses, including schools and recreation centers, and employment uses. 121 and 135 Mary Street are merged on title as one parcel, currently occupied by one 3-story building and one 1-story building, owned and operated by the Good Shepherd. Both buildings are proposed to be removed to accommodate the redevelopment. It's also important to note that Good Shepherd owns and operates 147 Mary Street, the corner property at the intersection of Mary Street and Cannon Street East. Public transportation is easily accessible along Cannon Street East and Wilson Street, where Hamilton Street Rail Route 3 operates with connections to various destinations within the city. Cannon Street East also provides convenient access to designated bike lanes that serve as an important east-west spine, connecting to other existing and future bike lanes across the city. Next slide. Just as a brief reminder, the site's designated downtown residential with high-rise 2 height permissions and within the downtown Hamilton secondary plan. The surrounding neighborhood is given mid to high-rise permissions and mixed use and residential land use planning status. Next slide. And next one as well. The subject lands are located within the historic Beasley neighborhood inventory, which includes a number of listed, registered, and designated heritage properties established in the mid to late 19th century. Cultural heritage resources include a mix of forms, styles, and uses, including industrial, commercial, and residential. The existing building at 135 Mary Street is included in the city's inventory of heritage buildings, and the existing building at 121 Mary Street is listed on the city's register of properties of cultural heritage value or interest as a non-designated property. Through the formal consultation, a cultural heritage impact assessment was identified as a requirement of site plan control and is currently in progress. Now I'll hand it over to Michael, who will provide an overview of the site and building design.
Thank you, Jennifer. Could I have the next slide, Kirsten, please? And jump in, Kirsten, if I miss something here. This is a site plan. It'll be quite quick. The north is to the right. The 10-story portion is to the right, and there's a 5-story portion to the left. On the left is a 7.5 meter setback to the low-rise residential. It's irregularly shaped at the rear of the building, the property line. We have about 14 to 15 meters setback at the rear for most of it, but then about half a meter for one-story portion and two-story portion where that jog is. To the right or the north, we have, you can see a shared driveway with an easement for 147 Mary Street, which is owned and operated by the Good Shepherd. Just off Mary Street, you can see the step back about 2 meters where the building's up tight, but then there's a step back portion of 2 stories there. Next slide. This is a landscape version of the same site plan. Here you can see lots of green to the south or the left. You can see the walkway and drive-through right through the middle of the building, or slightly to the right, that accesses the loading and refuse access. And then there's several green roofs. And then in the middle where you can see the pergolas there, just to the left is the terrace on the 5th floor, the roof of the 5th floor, which is on the 6th floor terrace for the residents. Next slide, please. Here you can see some forms of the building and the materials. At the bottom left is the front view from Mary Street. And there's another from the other angle, the one above it there. There's a close-up of the entrance. And then the bottom right, you can see where it says vehicle access. You can get a better view of the step back feature and the materials that we are proposing. Next slide, please. This is of the rear of the building, the top one, and the bottom one is an aerial view. You can see on the aerial view and perhaps on the previous slide where we have lots of large windows on the first 2 stories to make it interesting for the pedestrian traffic. Next slide, please. This is the one level of underground parking with bicycle, mechanical rooms, access ramp, and 35 spaces, 31 of which are designated to this building, and 4 of which is to the adjacent building where we've got an easement. Next slide. This is the ground floor where you can see the entrance coming in for a pedestrian entrance to get to the rear, but and the vehicular entrance to the rear for the loading and servicing the kitchen. This has got a couple of dining areas, office space, and kitchen and food prep. That one longer unit to the right is the superintendent's as well as the pet area for the facility. Next slide. This is the 2nd floor. It's again, the gap here is because the access to the rear is a 2-story space to allow room for large trucks. And to the right, that smaller part is the superintendent's. And then it's a support space with a number of offices and meeting rooms for the whole facility and for the Good Shepherd to serve the community. Next slide, please. Here we're getting into the residential units. This is the 3rd floor, which you can see they're all barrier-free accessible. In fact, all the units can be accessible in the future from their size. This one has a number of, a couple of lounges and some offices for extra support on this floor. In the middle, you can see the elevators, and behind the elevators is the janitor and refuse area, garbage rooms. Next slide. This is the 6th floor. So on the left is the roof over the 5th floor, and that has access for all the residents onto this fairly large amenity area. And a portion of it is the green roof on the far left. And that's the 3rd stairwell there for the building of the floors below that you can see. We've shown a couple of pergolas, and we do have a professional landscape architect who will be developing this as we move ahead for the amenity area as well as the grounds. They've done the ground and they've done this, but it's going to be developed a little bit more as we move ahead. There is a balcony, I should point out, on the right of every floor and at the end of the hall. We try and set up our corridors for any housing, especially affordable, supportive housing, so that there's a sense of orientation inside the hall, and you can see whether it's day or night outside. Next slide, please. These are the typical floors from 7 to 10 inclusive, and they similar to the floor below. Obviously, no access to the amenity area, and all supportive housing units, which are bachelor, or you might call studio suites. Next slide. Just a quick one of the roof that will have a mechanical area and then an open roof area. As described earlier, or as touched on earlier, there will be roof screening. There'll be mechanical units on the roof as well, and a generator. Next slide. Thanks. This is an aerial view rendering of the, just showing the context of the building and materials and the colors, basically. Next slide. Here's the renderings. Again, you got them wrong. We did, and I apologize for that. But this is the top one is the east elevation, which is, and maybe Krishna, if you could just zoom in onto the legend on the left there, just to show that we've bring it up a little closer. Yeah, we've carefully considered colors and materials. Excuse me. Stone, ebony brick, Brampton brick, grays. We have ACM panels at the higher elevations. We have precast concrete, and those are the main ones. We've got masonry to tie in with the neighborhood at the lower levels, and ACM panels at the upper levels. And you can see the very large windows facing Mary Street on the first 2 floors. And we've broken up the massing a little bit, as you can see, with the different colors. The windows are also quite large in all the units. They are studio suites, but we've made large windows in them to make them light and quite airy inside. Next slide, please. These are the end elevations. Again, the dark one there is the north elevation, and the lighter one is the south elevation. On the south, you can see the 5 stories and then the terrace on top. And next slide, please. And I think that's the last slide, is it, Kirsten? Yes, it is. And just another view from roughly street level from Mary Street, looking southeast. And sorry, southwest. And that's really, we'll leave this up, and I guess this is the end of my portion of the presentation, and I think it may go on to questions, but I'll end at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I'll turn it over to the first panelist. I think actually Ted has had to leave unless he can speak up. And that would make Eldon the first speaker otherwise.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Michael and team, for your presentation. Fantastic. Couple questions of clarity. On your floor plan, it indicated I guess a pet area. And when you zoom into the plan, it shows, I think, dog cages or cages. What is the intent of the function of that space? Is it a veterinary clinic? Is it a pet grooming location? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, it's my understanding it's all of those above, but I believe that maybe Brother Richard can help me on this. It's my understanding is that this is where people coming in can leave their pets while they get help from the people at the Good Shepherd.
Got it. That makes complete sense. And the other was, I don't recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall seeing a shadow study as part of the package. Was one required as part of your submission, or was one prepared?
So a shadow study was not required for as part of the DRP package, but it will be part of our full site plan submission.
Oh, interesting. And the last question was really about looking as the site plans up there, looking to the east of the site. And I may have missed this in your presentation, but can you explain how the movement from the property to the east is shared with this property? Because it looks like there's a correlationship of movement.
Do you want?
Could we try the maybe slide 5, Kirsten? With this. Can you repeat that one?
I think I can answer that if you want, Michael.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, if you want to go back to the site plan, Kirsten. So an earlier version of the plan had 2 accesses, one to the underground parking and one to the loading space at the rear. Per the urban design comments from the formal consultation, it was recommended that we reduce the access points on the site. And so we've explored this alternative access. And Good Shepherd owns the corner property. So the idea is that there will be an access easement for that shared driveway, which will provide access to the underground parking ramp. And then the main driveway on 135 will access the loading space. And we have accounted for the loss of parking spaces on the corner property. Those will be replaced in the underground parking through an offsite parking agreement.
And just a follow-up question to that, and looking at the movement, is it on the corner property, are there obstructions that prevent the driveway from being more of a 90-degree turn in, rather than what looks like a 30-degree angle?
Yeah, there are, you can see just the little rectangles in the corner. I believe those are hydro boxes. So we were just trying to kind of keep it limited to the existing parking area and driveway area.
Yeah, those are developments at the back. Those are 147 was renovated just a year or 2 ago. It's those, and so that is the reason. And to create access to the underground parking, Eldon, we had to have the ramp at the very rear part. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten 35 spaces downstairs. So, yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Jennifer Mallard.
Thanks, David, and thanks for your presentation. If you could flip back to that site plan, that would be super helpful. Building on Eldon's comments earlier, and I think when our group was looking at this in our pre-meeting, there were several questions around that vehicular access. So you've explained why and how the vehicles get through the adjacent site to the ramp. Why is there another driveway even necessary within this site?
Yeah, so we have run this exercise through auto turn, and we didn't have the width at the back of the property to make the turn work. So that's really the reason why. The loading space functions well, but because of the angle to get down to the underground parking ramp, we just couldn't make it work without losing some of the footprint.
So it's the hammerhead of the loading bay?
It's the turn coming from the hammerhead and then turning down to the underground ramp. That's the challenge.
I see.
Yeah.
In addition to that, it's the irregular shape of the rear property. You can see that protrusion. Otherwise, we would have slid the loading more to the left and had a longer run, but
Sure.
we had no room for it.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Yana?
Most of my questions were answered. And the only one I wanted to ask about is additional one is I didn't see any angular plane studies or any studies in regard to the low-rise residential, and I just wanted to ask if it was somewhere included or if you did that, and if you have that sketch by any chance.
So we don't have those. They weren't required as part of the DRP submission, so we don't have those prepared, but they will be included as part of the full site plan submission, in addition to the shadow studies.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer Sison?
Thank you. Thanks, Michael, Jennifer, and Daniel for your presentations. I have a couple of questions that are sort of reiterations of past ones. Building on Eldon's question about shadow studies, I also didn't see wind studies in the package. I'm assuming that may be same answer, to be developed later.
Yeah, required as part of the site plan, but not prepared as of yet.
Okay, and my second one, building on what Jennifer touched on for the driveway, just so that I'm fully understanding. The existing driveway on the adjacent property, that can't be used for both the underground parking and the loading space, so you need the driveway and the building canopy and that kind of under path.
Yeah, so the loading space, we did look at that as well, but there wouldn't be sufficient room for the trucks for a T turnaround on the site.
Okay.
Yeah, and the city typically won't allow trucks to back out onto a public right of way.
Okay, thank you. And I had two other questions on top of that. One was about 121 Mary Street, the non-designated building. Was there any consideration for its preservation or reuse?
Does anyone else want to speak to that?
I can try. I can speak to it. I mean, it's quite a tight site, and it's an ambitious program. There's an existing service, tremendous, that's provided by the Good Shepherd, and just really not enough space. As you can see, the site is quite well developed. So I can't see any. I couldn't see a practical way of saving that building, unless. If there's anything to add to that, maybe Chris Lee can. He's an architect that works with the Good Shepherd for many years, and he's been a tremendous asset on this project. But that's really it. There just really wasn't enough to develop a reasonable program and service the neighborhood by saving it.
And we could also note that the cultural heritage impact assessment will be prepared as part of the site plan as well. So, but that's still in progress.
Thank you. My final question was, you've shown a lot of streetscape amenities on Mary Street, but all of them are outside of the site boundaries. I was wondering if that work is intended to be completed by the proponent, or is it going to be completed by the city, or how do you see that rolling out?
I could, to build a building of this size and scale, and we've done a number of them, it'll be torn up. The portion of so the area between our property, the client's property line and the street would be damaged by the construction and would be restored or would be put in by the client. Yes.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
I think I'm the last one. Yes. My question actually is to the city. I noticed in the document there was some kind of holding 17 and 18 or 17 and 19 that was referred to in the client submission. Wondering if you could explain what that is. It was in the context of the height allowance or something like that, that there was some kind of holding on them. Does anybody
Sorry, in
clarify
terms
what
of
that means?
the client submission, page 17 or 18?
It was in a description of what was allowed on the site, and then it said that it was allowed to have 99 meters or something and then note holdings
Yes.
17 and 19. What does that
So
mean?
a number of those don't come into effect until you try to go over 44 meters in height. So there's holding provisions that kick in terms of required studies, mandatory studies that have to be submitted if you exceed a height of 44 meters. And then I believe also one of them is for heritage.
So I believe there are 3 holding provisions on the property. The 2 I think that you are referencing, David, are the ones for over 44 meters in height, and then holding provision 20 restricts
if they don't concern the property or the proposal, then that's sufficient.
Well, there is one that holding provision 20. We will have to get removed, and that restricts the property to 22 meters, I believe. And part of that removal is describing to the city how any loss of rental units is going to be replaced, I believe. But there aren't additional studies linked to that provision.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, so I guess I'll turn to the first. I've got to find the document that tells me who goes next. Shoot, I've lost my Word document that tells me who's the first speaker.
I think it's Eldon.
I think it's me. Yeah.
You're right. Sorry.
Go ahead, David. While you take your
I was
time.
trying to research where I found that holding thing on it, and I lost my document, so I apologize to everybody here. So go ahead.
Thanks. So I just want to again thank the proponent for the submission. I think, first of all, obviously the use in itself is creating a positive addition to the city and providing additional space. I noticed throughout the questions that we had asked, our panel had asked, a lot of those missing pieces, at least I think in my mind, missing pieces such as angular plane, shadow study, seem to be diverted or anticipated to be provided at the site plan stage. But it struck me that this is the forum in which that information would be most valuable to help provide input and information on your proposal, to provide input back to city staff. So I think maybe not to the applicant, but possibly to staff, if it's indicated as part of the process that this information is not necessary or required in order to make a DRP application, I think it should be reinforced that those are helpful for us to do our job. I think overall you do have a great proposals and a lot of great elements in terms of on-site amenity and the way you've been able to find space internally within the built form, both orientation to the street. I am very concerned about the intersection at the rear and the cross-access easement that's to be established. It looks confusing. Just looking at it from a 2D view, I'm not sure as the natural driver comes in, and I'm sure through that process, city transportation department may also opine on this and determine whether it is a safe movement. But just from the looks of it, it looks like there is a potential for conflict. There's a potential for confusion, and I would urge you to consider options to realign or adjust whether there is an opportunity to relocate, some of those electrical boxes or other items, or using wayfinding or other, design implementation tools, whether it be painted line or whether it be reestablishing curb in certain areas that give better direction and guidance to the traveler as to how they move between the sites and on the site. As right now, it does look a little confusing. But those are my comments, and thank you for your presentation.
Jennifer Mallard.
Thanks. Thank you for your presentation, and I echo Eldon's comments about the value of this kind of development within the city, and adding more capacity to help those people who need this kind of space is a completely admirable project. So it's rewarding actually for us to review this kind of program. I have no concerns about the parking. If there's any concern about a slightly lower parking provided than the bylaws require, given that this is a downtown site and given that the use of this building, I think the demand on parking will be lower. So that shouldn't be a stumbling block, I think. I just have a couple of comments in terms of design. The brick at the podium is great for contextuality and for a human scale and the warmth for people, you know, coming into a residential building. Your industrial sort of steel sash windows that echo, they're probably not steel sash, I'm sure they're not, but they're echoing the steel sash windows of the commercial buildings nearby. It's a nice touch. I think the use of the cornice, though, is a bit maybe not completely representative to the commercial buildings nearby. I don't know if they have such pronounced cornices. Maybe they do, but I think that you've used the cornice line on upper pieces, on the mechanical penthouses, and on the roof line of the taller building that is clad in metal, and those are a bit not historic. It wouldn't be a historic application of that. I think the cornice on the mechanical penthouses actually calls up those masses a little bit too much, and we'd rather have them a little less pronounced. And I would question the use of the cornice on the metal building, because the crisp modern panel wouldn't. You've shifted from a historic language at the podium to a modern language in the tower, and I think they should be distinctly different, and maybe they deserve a bit more of a separation between the two languages to give each their own. So those are my only comments. Thank you.
Yana.
Thank you. So I'm very happy that we can review this building and that the use you are providing, it's very, very important. The site design seems very confusing and somewhat convoluted in regard to the vehicular access and movement to me, and I would strongly suggest to revisit that area. The ramp in its proposed location next to the property line, I would strongly suggest to integrate the ramp with the building to free the space and create a better interface with your neighbors, create some landscape area along this property line. The same goes for the proposed build form along this edge. To me, this seems extremely tall for the interface with what is around that, especially from the rear, and without, as Sheldon was saying, without the shadow study, without the angular plane study, without, well, not angular plane, but studying what is around you, it's very difficult for us to comment, but it seems to me that it's tall, and I would really strongly suggest to reduce the height by at least a couple stories. The proposal has some very nice elements, as others were saying. I really like the large windows on the first 2 stories facing the streets, for example. But generally, to me, it seems that the building is very large and fairly flat, and it really should be reduced in height and at least, as I said, a couple of stories. And the modulation of the massing should be much more significant to create a building which fits better into this neighborhood. I echo Jennifer's comments about the roof structure, so I won't go into that. And one little thing maybe, but I would suggest not to use a dark color on the top of the building. It's just to me, it makes it heavier and pronounces the height and the massing so much more. But that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you. So I agree with actually all of the comments already made, and I'd second Jennifer on the reduction in car parking being appropriate given the location. And I think the addition of more bike parking is really more suitable to support the future residents. So I appreciate that. You've done some really good things. You've shown some good private amenity areas, both at grade on the 6th story, as well as some consideration for what could be some very nice public amenity areas on Mary Street that will need to be completed in coordination with the city. You've also shown some good active uses at grade with the dining spaces on the south side of the building, but I do feel it would benefit from some additional glazing at the north end. Larger windows in particular would help this, and I appreciate that you've provided some larger windows for the units as well. I also find the massing of the building to be too large, not necessarily too tall, but if you are building at tower heights, I'd recommend that you reduce the tower floor plate to respect the tall building guidelines, which state I think 750-meter floor plate is appropriate at about the 13th story and upwards. The building could also be stepped back a bit further on the upper stories to help with transitioning from adjacent properties and screening of the mechanical penthouse. Overall, I'm really happy that you're coming forward with this development, and I applaud the work that the Good Shepherd is doing and continuing to provide for the community, so thank you for that. I'm pleased to see the affordable housing units being proposed, and I look forward to future iterations of this that optimize the use of your site while keeping in consideration the comments that the panel have given you today. Thank you.
I echo a lot of what my fellow panelists have commented. I did have one more question, and it is about the use of parking. Is the parking number that you have generated by trying to get, what's driving the need for the number of parking spaces that you actually are providing? And you expect many of the tenants to have cars, for example. So could you have fewer car parking spaces and still meet your needs?
Oh, yeah.
It is also a matter of zoning. So
no, I understand that,
yeah.
but I would argue that right now, I agree with all the challenges that you guys have got on the ground floor plan and the complexity of the. I don't think you have a working solution right now in terms of your arrangement of the ground plane, and part of it is you were talking about where the ramp goes and how you need to have it up there to maintain the number of spaces you have in the basement. And I would argue that you should right size your parking to what you need and make arguments accordingly with the zoning. And that might free up your ability to study how you might solve the circulation on the site for vehicles, and ideally result in only having one access, the shared one that you have with the adjacent property, and not have that drive through your building. And that might enable you to reconsider, a variety of things about the building massing and whatnot, because I do think you do have a challenge with your massing, as you're sensing from some of the comment. We see that you have a challenge. It's a little overwhelming, and maybe not. There's some great moves at the ground level. The connection that you're making with the surrounding industrial vocabulary of the buildings, the large windows and the brick motif is I think working well. The tower component I don't think is integrated in a successful way into that lower move, and I can't help but wonder if part of that is the oddity of this pass through and how it creates an odd, like one of your entrances and whatnot is not addressing the street. There's a number of urban moves that I think that are falling. I think you get back to the crux. It's trying to solve that vehicle circulation and the loading and parking access that is driving a bunch of decisions that I think are making the solution kind of less than satisfactory. So I do feel that a simpler, figure out the simpler way to solve all of these vehicle things, and I think make an argument for less parking if that's necessary to make it work for you. I think that other comments about the application of the materials on the building, I don't think it's really, I think you could have a simpler strategy, and one that, as Jana was saying, articulates the building components in a more clear way, or a more modulated massing. It's relatively flat relationship, and yet you're sort of establishing differences by just changing a material. And I think that you could do a more a more complex massing that would be more, simple base. I mean, this is very, I think you could go with a little bit more simple and not so much of this kind of modern stuck on a heritage. I think go with something that's a little more straightforward, and that might help. I think that the tower with its dark material coming all the way down on what I guess is the north side. I have to admit I'm completely disoriented in which way is which. I think it's coming down, I think, as a move is really something that's not very scale friendly to the setting, and really kind of emphasizes the tower of that. And I wonder if the low rise component that's making most of the building sort of look like it fits into the surrounding fabric, if it was carried around the whole complex, and the tower was a little bit more of a discrete element, might make a more successful street relationship, and in combination with some of these other things. I think that there is a great project here, certainly totally in support of the initiative. I think that there is some opportunity for some refinement, and hopefully there's some suggestions that we provided that will help you along on this initiative. I don't really have anything more to add to that. If you have any questions for us as a panel member.
I don't think so, but thank you very much, everyone, for
good.
your comments and your time, and it's been a very helpful meeting.
Yeah.
Best wishes.
Thank you very much.
Talk to you later.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.